and welcome back to another one of EmberWrite's Craft Chats. Today we are going to be covering how to pitch your readers like a pro, and this is going to cover a lot of ground on in-person pitching. So whether you are pitching readers or pitching an agent that you met at a conference, this is going to be a great session for you to cover. I'm Mike McGuire, co-founder and community lead for EmberWrite, and today I am joined by Todd Fahnestock. Todd is an award-winning #1 best-selling author of fantasy for all ages, including epic fantasy series Threadweavers and the Whisper Prince Trilogy. He is a founder of Eldros Legacy, a multi-author, shared world, mega epic fantasy series that is a 3-time winner of the Colorado Authors League Award for Writing Excellence. His passions are great stories and his quirky, fun-loving family. When he's not writing, he travels the country meeting fans, talks philosophy with his son, plays board games with his wife, dissects movies with his daughter, and plays to the point of bruises with Galahad the Wine-Ramer. Todd, it is awesome to have you on today. I am super excited to hear this one because I was in for your conference series at Superstars, so I have a little bit of what our readers are in for today, and I think they're in for a treat.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure. It was great to meet you, and I'm excited to talk about anything you want to talk about. So,
all right, awesome. So without further ado, we will go ahead and jump into pitching. So I think that a lot of folks are obviously familiar with the type of pitching that we would need to do for like a query letter or some format of a written pitch. Whenever we get into the realm of in-person pitching, is that like a totally different animal? Do we have some shared traits there, or are we basically dealing with a completely different situation?
yeah, I mean, query letters were never my strong suit. I have to admit that right up front. I'm sure there are people listening to this that are much better at writing query letters than I am. And honestly, I was not good at in-person pitching until I kind of fell into it backwards during a moment of, how shall I say it, hardship in my writing career. So the difference between doing a query letter and pitching in person, I would assume, is vast. I mean, I've done a couple query letters, as I mentioned, in the past, but I was never an expert at it. For me, an in-person pitch is a wholly different animal, not just in relation to a query letter, but also in relation to talking to industry professionals. Talking to a reader is different than talking to, say, an agent or editor.
Okay, so you actually covered my next question. Are those things different? And I guess, how does this differ in your mind if you're basically pitching to a reader versus pitching to an editor or an agent?
They've seen a gazillion stories, right? I mean, they've probably been slush pile readers at some point, if not their own slush pile reader. And so they can recognize many, many, many things about a writer based on just a page, or even a paragraph, really, most of the time. And so when you're pitching to them, there's not really any reason to try and seduce them, right? Like they've been to the rodeo a gazillion times. You want to get to the nuts and bolts and tell them what's great about your story. You get to the basic elements of the plot. You get to how the story is structured, how long it is. I mean, the nuts and bolts there, and then they can ask questions based on that. The difference between that and pitching to a reader, in my experience, is the reader, you want to, or I always try to, immerse them in the mood of what you do. You have a very brief moment, and usually when I'm pitching to people, it is a riot of stimuli all around, usually Comic-Cons and that sort of thing. I mean, you are competing with the best of the best when it comes to visual stimuli and, verbal stimuli and all of that. They're just got a million things that they could go look at. And to try and capture them, it is always a gamble. And what you want to do is show them what they're in for. Put them into the mood of your book. And there's quite a few tricks to do that. You don't want to do that with an agent or editor. You try and start putting them in the mood of the book. They're going to be like, okay, just tell me what exactly happens. And you go straight to, the catalyst and the break into Act 2 and the fun and games aspects and what's going to happen at the crux at the end. With readers, no, you're creating a trailer. You're trying to suck them in.
Okay. And it's actually funny because listening to this, I'm thinking of how apps are built in the tech world. The product perspective, you've got this very mechanical kind of structured, this is what we do to produce a PRD document, this is what it's going to look like. Whereas when we get into more of the marketing of those apps, it becomes much more like an equivalent of what I'm seeing with your readers, of basically you need to really pull them in, capture their attention as soon as possible, and not bore them with the technical details, essentially.
I would say that's a fair analogy, right? That the people who know all this stuff already, you want to get to the nuts and bolts of it. And the people that don't know it, you want to spin them a yarn. You want to give them an idea of what kind of storyteller you are. And it can take some time to do that.
I do want to go on a little bit of a tangent here, but you said there are multiple ways to pull in your readers. And I imagine, pitches being one of them, but I'm picturing at these kinds of conventions and things like that, that probably there's even steps before you get to the pitch. So kind of where are the elements that you would say would be the most important to kind of hook readers into even listening?
Yeah. So when I do this, as you mentioned, I do workshops for this. I call them Conquering the Con, which is, like I said, mostly where I sell is at a con. And the first one is actually logistics and setup. And that's the Conquering the Con part 1. Part 2 is the pitch, which is what we're talking about today. But one of the first things I say when I'm talking about the pitch is your presentation, how you appear to somebody walking up before you've even said a word, is the first piece. It's the foundation from which you pitch. And you can do a fantastic pitch without having a fantastic presentation. I've seen some master pitch salespeople do that. But I say, why start, with both feet on the ground? Why not start, if you got 10 units of effect that you can have on somebody, why not start on step 3 and then, go up from there? And I've had a lot of people tell me that the backdrop that I have, this 8-foot by 8-foot picture of a dragon that comes from the Tower of the Four series, that they came across the con to see this. He's like, I saw that from 100 feet away. I had to come over here. What is that? That's free marketing right there. They're coming over to me. I don't have to rope them in this particular case. And I will talk a little bit later, if you want me to, about the 4 different categories of readers that you can pitch to, right? Or people that you can pitch to. And I say at one point that there are 2 of those categories that you really want to focus on. And one of them is the ones that have come to you. You don't have to pull them to you. And that's how that happens, is from the presentation, that setup from the very beginning.
Yep. And my marketing brain is thinking about all the different ways this applies, because if we're talking about author websites, obviously the design of the site is important to kind of entice readers and say, oh, hey, this is very interesting. If we're talking about social media presence, how you're presenting yourself on videos and things like that. So I think, folks, all of this stuff is going to be elements that can apply to lots of different things. And I will try to highlight those where we can, where there might be some cross-pollination with some of this, because this pitch is absolutely critical and it is a heart of a lot of what you're going to do as an author, but it has basically all different places that it can touch as well. So, alrighty. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of these in-person pitches, because I can imagine if this is anything like the pitches that I've had to run in person for EmberWrite, there's probably a lot of very, very careful planning, sitting down, writing things out, going through the pitch over and over again until you have it down. Where do you start with this when you're writing a pitch?
Yeah, so for me, it was almost like taking the back cover copy and trying to morph it over time. So let me just say this, that my pitches and what I know about pitches has been crafted and chiseled and formed over many, many events and many, many years at this point. And it started with just trying to tell them what my story was about, right? And as I did it more and more and more, repetition is your ally in this. That the more you can fumble and mess up in front of somebody and be like, oh, that just killed me, you're going to remember that, right? You're going to remember that. You're not going to do that again. And I have done that so many times. And sometimes you do nothing wrong and you still get the sort of like, they walk away. One of the stories that I love, and this didn't happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. And she was pitching at this Ren Fair or whatever, and she sells books for kids. And there was this, 10-year-old, 9-year-old kid that she was pitching to. And she did a pitch to him, and his big sister came over and grabbed him by the arm and pulled him away. And she was like, "That's enough out of you." she was walking away. I mean, like, so you're going to get these sorts of things. I mean, but how do you respond to that? There's no response to that. You just sort of be like, bye.
Oh, man. I think reason number 2000 that I probably could not be a children's book author, because, oh, man, That has to be brutal. I can only
Full
imagine.
honesty, absolute full honesty. And I mean, I've had the hardest ones, and I've had every single kind of rejection face to face that you can possibly imagine. The worst ones for me are when you're in the midst of your pitch and they just turn and walk away without saying a thing. They just turn and walk away. It's like, wow, it just like it hits us at the center of our social creature nature, where it's like that person didn't even say goodbye, didn't say, look, I don't have time for this. I got to go do something else. I'm not really interested. They just, like you are persona non grata. They just walked away from you, right?
Man. So I guess whenever we're getting into this, obviously there's going to be a lot of trial and error, and that makes complete sense. Another one that I do want to highlight for some folks is measure how fast you're speaking as well, because I know from my experience pitching, I tend to go at about 10x speed, and that is an attempt to cram everything in as short amount of time as possible. So
yes, the speed is super important. Like people pick up on your mood, right? So if you are pitching really super fast, they're going to pick up on it. They'll know that you're feeling self-conscious, or that you're thinking you're an imposter, or if you want to get it over with really quickly, you're like, okay, I just need to get the pitch out. They're going to sense that you're going to be nervous. They're going to get nervous, and they're going to want to get away from you, right? I mean, that whole thing, like, people rarely remember what you say. They sometimes remember what you do, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. Right. That's in a nutshell. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong in some places, but the essence of it is, if you can make them feel relaxed, if you can make them feel welcome, if you can make them feel that this is the place to be, they're going to stick around. If you're nervous and you're like, please buy my book, they're going to be like, thanks, dude. Unless they're, sort of the conscientious, compassionate type, they may give you a pity buy, but that will not take you to where you want to be as an author. Getting pity buys is not what you want. What you want is when somebody comes over and you start to talk to them and they get this glisten in their eye and they sort of sink, and you've got them, that they're interested in what you have to say, right? And then they buy the book, they read it right away, they love it, and they come back for more. I mean, like, that's the cycle that you want. Just selling the book isn't enough. You want them to buy it for the right reasons. You want them to buy it because they're going to love it, right?
So I guess let's go to the how we start getting this set up, because obviously, again, this is going to take a cycle of, much like our characters, those try-fail cycles, it sounds like, is going to be a lot of what pitching comes out to be. But I'm sure there's groundwork that we've got to start with. So if you are going to basically get started with, you're starting from zero on a pitch, basically, you've never done this before.
Yep.
What is kind of step one in your mind?
So, the first thing is to try and encapsulate your story into something that could be 30 to 90 seconds. Now, there are different schools of thought on this. I tend to run long compared to what most people would say a pitch would be. 90 seconds is like, for some people, that's way too long. And I would agree to an extent, because I've seen it work. Sometimes the longer the pitch is, the more people will get in. But I have the ability, because I know these pitches so well and I know how to make them longer and make them shorter. I have the ability to flex them depending on what I see in the eyes of the reader. Like, if they're really into it, I can stretch that thing out and give them a show. My flavor of pitching is the entertainer. Now, that said, I've been next to extremely successful pitchers. The one that comes to mind for me, a couple years ago, I had a booth right next to Andy Peliquin, who is a fantastic author, very successful in his field. And that guy was not the entertainer. He was like the happy innkeeper. He would see people carrying books, and he's very well read, so he leaned on that strength. He's like, what'd you get there? Oh, I've read that. It's so great. And then they just kind of come over, and he doesn't say a thing about his book until they're like, well, what is it that you do? And they pick up a book, and he's like, oh, that's, John Wick meets the Rescuers, or whatever. He had just like two comparables that he mashed together, and then they start reading and they buy it. Like, he would do that over and over and over. But I don't think that works as well if you don't have that personality. And he is a very large person and a very large personality. So he leaned into his strengths, not to mention well-read, because anybody who had a book, he could talk to them about 80% of them, right? So really, part of doing a good pitch is to assess what your strengths are to start, right? If you can. And sometimes you don't even know what your strengths are because you haven't been pitching. That was me in the beginning. I didn't know what my strengths were, and I just kept throwing myself into the water again and again and again until I started to swim. And so first, try and condense your story into something that could fit into 30 to 90 seconds, right? Once you do that, you'll have something to work with that you can punch, like little bits that you can punch. Now, I would say, first of all, it doesn't have to be entirely accurate. Now, that is like a knife in the heart of any author who's put so much time and effort into putting this story together, right? They want people to know what it is they've done in the correct way. I mean, like, we authors are kind of strange creatures in that respect, in that we want them to pronounce the names the way that we wrote them, and we want them to think the things that we want them to think. But it's hard to unwind that, right? And say, this is not about you as an author, it's about them as a reader, and what will make them stay, what will make them be interested in listening to you for another moment. I have taken stories, and later, if you want me to give you an actual pitch of one of my stories, I will show you what I'm talking about. I have conflated characters. Like, in the pitch, one character does this and this and this, and in the book they do this, and there are two other characters that do this and this. That's not even true. What I've told them is not even true about the story, right? But in order to convey the mood of what I'm trying to convey, and the nutshell of the story that I'm trying to convey, I have to do that, because I have to shorten it up. And if you go too long, I mean, the worst pitches in the world are when the author gets lost in the story that they love so much, and they just sort of ramble and ramble. Oh, and then there's this thing. Oh, and there was this other thing. And then they forget. Oh, and then there was this other. I mean, like, people just go to sleep when you do that. You have to have something that you can roll off your tongue without stumbling, without going and oh, and yeah, and oh, and back. And like, you, as you said, you want to get something. You want to memorize it over and over and over and over and over again, then pitch it, and then you really start the work, because you see how people react to it. You'll have a pitch that's, say, 60 seconds long, and you watch their switch click off at 20 seconds. 20 seconds in, you're like, okay, they're bored at this point. I see them getting bored. And in this instance, I would say, I highly recommend for anybody who wants to do this, sell their books face-to-face, to go to low-cost events, flea markets where you can get a booth for $50, or holiday markets, or little events locally where you can go screw up as much as you want, and you're only out $50 and a weekend of your time, right? But you can learn all of the things that people will respond. I know that one of the things in Save the Cat, that Blake Snyder, who wrote Save the Cat, which is a great, if you haven't heard of it, it's a great book for storytelling. It was meant for screenplays, but it taps into some fantastic elements of storytelling in general. But he says, take your pitch, and he's talking about like a short, log line kind of pitch, to the line at Starbucks, and pitch to some random stranger, because this person's in a hurry. They've got other things on their mind. And if they can give you 30 seconds to pitch them something and you can get them interested, that is the hardest audience you'll ever get, right? So if you can get them interested there, you have something. And if you don't, then you have to rework it. And I think swap meets and holiday fairs and stuff are the same kind of thing. For real cheap, you can get in front of real people and see what your pitch has as an effect on them. And of course, there's all kinds of things. It's not just the words, it's how you deliver them. It's your hand motions. Like, you see, I'm really crazy with my hand motions. I love doing that, right? I had this one lady come up to me, and after I pitched her, she's like, I loved your pitch. I was like, oh, thanks. And she's like, I also loved the fact that you use dance movements in your pitch. I was like, I don't know if I would call it dance movements, but she was clearly a dancer, and she identified that part of it was the spectacle that you're putting on as you're talking, right? So those are pieces for later. But initially, get that 30 to 90 seconds, work it until it's polished. It's the best thing that you can do. And then go pitch it to people, and you'll realize where the holes are real quick.
Yeah. Okay. So just with that, I feel like there's 10 different directions I could take this. The first thing I do want to say is, folks, if you have watched our session with Kevin Eikenberry that he covers story structure, we talked a lot about Save the Cat. If that was not enough of a reason for you to go read that book, I feel like Todd's pitch here, it should be enough of a reason for you to go read it, because that's actually a genius idea, because I think all of us, especially, in novel writing, we have a tendency to get this fixation on like the query type of pitch. And I think it's just because that's, very much what is the norm usually. And I don't think we think about the fact that if you can do a verbal pitch like that, basically your query pitch might be something that might not even be that hard compared to having to go pitch somebody in person.
I mean, I think query pitches, like I said, I won't speak to the strength of them, but because I'm not fantastic at query pitches, but I think that if you know your book inside and out, it's going to help you wherever, whether it's a query letter or whether it's talking to an editor or an agent. I mean, there's not an amount of time that can be wasted getting more familiar with how to talk about your story. It, every ounce of energy and time that you put into that is going to come out useful in other places and other ways.
And I think another thing I want to kind of add on to this is you mentioned, where authors have a tendency to ramble about their stories, things like that. Guys, get that out with your friends. Basically, have your friends ask you what your book is about, and then you can go into like the 15-minute ramble case. But that is not what we're looking for with a pitch,
Right.
Because these things do need to be very, very polished, very timed, very formatted. And just like Todd said, the memorization to me is probably the most important part. I know for EmberWrite, because typically when I'm doing this pitch, I have a computer in one hand and I'm showing the screen and going through different steps and things like that. I had to do that probably about 50 times before we went to our first conference, in which basically I could do that and do that smoothly. So folks, that memorization is going to be a huge help, just because at any of these in-person pitches, you're probably going to be a little bit more amped up than you usually would be. Regardless of how many times you've done it, there's always going to be that little bit of adrenaline. So definitely memorize that pitch, because it will make your life easier, because you'll remember the flow and remember the order of, oh yeah, and then I need to go here, and then I need to go here. So almost mapping it out as well, and having your waypoints of, hey, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the story environment first, and then I'm going to go into the main character, and then I'm going to go into his primary exploit over here. And having that map in your mind will help you stake out, if you have those moments where you blank out during the pitch, that you can go, oh, here's the point that I need to go to next. So I cannot stress that enough with this. It's just memorization is your friend. I guess going back to kind of the mechanics of pitching, and we're talking about kind of the actual pitch itself that you're giving. Obviously, that kind of experimentation and testing is incredibly important. How do you approach it, the physical aspect of it? Because you mentioned you use your hands a lot, things like that. And I'm just curious, like, is that something that you practice beforehand? Is that something that just kind of comes naturally to you? How did that kind of evolve?
I would say the talking and the hand motions and trying to engage someone one-on-one is probably, I didn't learn that just for this. I mean, it was part of my personality before, I think. But it can be learned, absolutely. But the goal when I talk to somebody about a book, obviously, is to get them interested and sell them a book. But initially, it's about engaging with them. Right? Engaging with them in a real way. You got people that are walking around a con and they're seeing a gazillion people that want to sell them a gazillion things. And most of it is sort of surface connection. But with a writer, and writers, I mean, like, artists can sit there and let people look at their stuff and don't necessarily have to talk to them. Although the most successful ones I've seen still do engage with the customer. But writers, absolutely, because they see the cover and they don't know necessarily what's in the book. I mean, your cover hopefully is on point and very genre focused, specific, identifying the tropes that are in the story. But still, that doesn't mean, just because I've got, some woman with magical glimmers coming off of her fingers and a dude with a sword and a dragon in the background, you get that it's fantasy, but you don't get why you would rather read this than some other person who's writing fantasy. You don't know that until you talk to the author. So creating a connection with them is first. And yes, having all of that, like you talked about the memorization of the pitch, super important. But I say it's super important so you know what to fall back on. Like, as you said, you get nervous or whatever. But it's there as a tool, not to follow meticulously, but to have at your command, so that when you're making this connection with somebody, now you've got this tool back here that you're ready to hit them with when it's time. But judging when it's time, getting sort of, this friendly vibe with them is more important than the pitch. Again, that old adage, people very rarely remember what you say. They more remember what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. If you can make that person feel good being at your booth, that's more than half the battle right there. Then you start telling them your pitch, and that connection can happen in seconds. It doesn't have to take 3 minutes of you gabbing with them about the weather. It could happen just by, like I said, Andy Pelican does, like, what are you reading? Oh, this. Oh, man, that's fabulous. You're going to love it. Really? I like this sort of thing. I mean, like, boom, that's it. That's all it takes. That amount of time can be enough to create that connection, and then, talk to them about your story.
Okay. I do want to dive in a little bit more on that aspect. what are the kinds of things you're looking for to make that connection point? Because I think I'm thinking off the top of my head a few things like shared fandoms, for example. Like if I saw somebody walking around with like a Square Enix bag or something like that, that would
Absolutely.
be something I would call out, you know. But how do you do that initial approach that I guess would be the pre-pitch work?
It is different for almost every person. I could lump them into categories, right? You've got the people whose eyes are glowing as soon as they see your stuff and they come up to your booth and they're primed and ready, and there's not a whole lot you need to do with that. You've got the people that are kind of looking at you, but they're not sure they want to engage with you, just like they're not sure they want to engage with the 50 other booths they just walked by, and you can reach out to them and do what's called the hook, is what I call it. Do you read fantasy? Do you like, The Matrix? Do you, whatever? Are you a Dungeons and Dragons fan? Like, these are questions you can ask to get people to say, oh yeah, no, I do like Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, cool. Well, I'm a big fan and blah, 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 blah. And then you just kind of start a conversation. One of the ones that I use a lot, especially when there's a ton of people walking by, is, do you want to hear about a book? It's short, it's sweet, and it is something that, it presents a contract, right? If they say nope and keep on walking, you're like, okay, don't have to worry about that. If they say yeah, you don't feel disingenuous then when you're like, okay, well, let me tell you about this one. If you say something like, do you like fantasy books? Yeah, I do like fantasy books. Well, let me tell you about mine. You didn't exactly enter into a contract with them, right? A verbal contract. They didn't say, oh yeah, no, I want to hear about your book. But most people will still come over and say, okay, well, tell me. I've seen that work really, really well. But like commenting on their shirt, I will say, with comments on their shirt or cosplay or something else, it should be a genuine compliment. It can't just be every single person you walk by, nice, cosplay. It should be something genuine, because what they feel coming off of you is going to make the difference. If they feel like it's a false compliment, you're already putting yourself a couple points behind. I'd much rather just be some dude as opposed to some dude who falsely complimented me and didn't mean it. Don't put yourself at a disadvantage to start. Be genuine.
Right. And that complete sense on that. I think a lot of these are the sales tactics that we would kind of expect to hear over and over. And again,
Yep.
being genuine is usually number one on those lists, basically, because I think if we think about this kind of in an application that maybe more people have been on the receiving end of, if you've ever gotten an email out of the blue that is just, hey, I noticed you did this and this. If you're in the LinkedIn world, this is very typical with cold pitching, things like that. Those things have a tendency to feel disingenuous unless it's somebody that can also point to, hey, by the way, I'm also a fantasy author. I saw you were doing this work. That's the difference, folks. And that's what you want to feel coming forward in these in-person pitches, especially because there is a lot of the energy, I guess, exchange there as well.
Yeah, I think that I look at myself as a steward of these readers, right? They've come to my booth. They're looking for epic fantasy. They want edge of your seat epic fantasy. They want something fast paced. They want what I do. And I'm here. I'm not going to try and sell you something just to sell you something and say, okay, got my money, don't care about them anymore. If you're an author that does that, you're not going to have a very big following. You have to care about the people that are interested in the stuff that you do, right? And so for me, there is absolutely zero reason to be non-genuine, right? Because this is a long-term relationship, hopefully, that you're building with this person. So start it off right. Think about that every time you're engaging with somebody. Make sure that you're trying to be yourself, because hopefully you're going to know this person, this fan, for a long time.
Yep. And it is all about that relationship building, and folks, this applies no matter how you are selling your books. If you are selling courses that you're doing, if you're selling books, if you're selling an app, all of this applies. So I think, Todd, one of the things that you did mention that I want us to go into a little bit as well is you kind of mentioned the types of potential pitch groups that you will have. Can we go ahead and cover a little bit about like what those groups are, which ones are going to be the ones that are well primed to basically be accepting of your pitches versus the ones that maybe it's going to be a little bit more of a harder sell?
Yeah. No, I group them into 4 different categories. So you've got those people that are looking actively for what you do, right? Those are the best. They've come to the con looking for epic fantasy. And hopefully, if you've been to this con a few times, they're coming looking for you specifically. I had this one woman. So San Diego is the con that I'm going to go to in about a week and a half. And the first night is preview night, and people come in to get the things that they want to get before they get sold out, right? So they go straight to the thing that's the most important to them and they get it. And where I'm at, way, way, way in the back of the con, is like, this is, you twiddle your thumbs for the first 2 hours of that preview night because nobody's coming over here. They're going to Marvel, they're going to Star Wars, they're going to, Lego, they're going to all these, famous people. And I had this one woman rush up and say, okay, I wanted to make sure I got your stuff before you sold out. I was like, you just made my whole day. It's like, it's empty over here. And this woman comes rushing up to the booth. So those are the people that are the best, right? That one, you don't have to do a lot with. I would say with that particular category, don't try over hard, right? The last thing you want to look to those people is desperate. So just let them come to you, talk with them about the weather because they're going to buy something. They came here for you or for what you do. And when you sell them, just put your heart and soul into it. So let's say they haven't bought from you before, but they did see your poster and you're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I love. I'm like, oh, well, do you like this and this and this? Oh, I love this and this and this. Well, then let me tell you about this one. You're going to love it. And of course they do, and they buy it and they go on. So the second category is those who would buy your book if they noticed you, right? Million things going on. They may not even look your way. They didn't come here looking for you. They didn't really even come here looking for epic fantasy, but they love epic fantasy. They just go to a con because they think it's all about movie stars and comic books, and they haven't even thought about the notion of a novelist being here, right? But if you caught their attention, they might be interested in what you do. Those are the ones that you're trying to rope in. You're like, come on over here. Let me show you what I do. Oh, wow, I didn't realize this was here. Then you can engage them in that conversation. Third category is those who wouldn't usually buy your book. Maybe they're here and they're in their, 60s or whatever, and they brought their 15-year-old granddaughter or whatever it is, right? And she's going gaga over, K-pop demon hunters, and they've never even heard of that. And so they're kind of wandering around but they're fantasy readers of old. They just haven't picked up a book in a long, long time, and they notice your booth and they're not really looking at it. And you say, hey, do you want to hear about a book? And they're like, oh, thank goodness. Like, I don't know what all this other stuff is. Tell me about your book, right? So you tell them about your book and they're like, yeah, I usually read Westerns or whatever. And you're like, well, have you ever wanted to read a fantasy book? Yeah, I would do it if it was good. I'm like, okay, this is the one you want, right? And then you tell them about Tywin the Unkillable or whatever it is, right? So that's the third category. And then the fourth category is the people that would never buy your book. Like, they don't read, like they're not there for any of that. They watch movies and they think reading is a dumb thing or whatever, right? So I say you focus the reason for your pitch, the reason that you put all this effort into the pitch, into the presentation, into the hook, into the happy innkeeper kind of personality is for the second two categories, the second and the third category, the people who would buy your book if they noticed, and those who wouldn't usually buy your book. Those are the people that you're trying to convince. Because what? Category number one, they're going to buy your stuff anyways. They're here for you. Category number 4, they're not going to buy your stuff anyway. It doesn't matter what you do. You could do the biggest song and dance in the world, and they're just going to be indifferent, right? So the two middle categories are what you're working on.
Okay. And along with that, this one may be putting you on the spot a little bit, but if we had to talk about pitch personalities, basically, are there some that you've seen that seem to crop up regularly? I know you mentioned that you're kind of the entertainer type, whereas, we have other authors that are kind of more the happy innkeeper. I'm just curious, like, are there ones that you see that, tend to be successful that you go, oh yeah, I can peg that person as a, X type or things like that?
So the ones that want it tend to be the most successful. The ones that want it enough to try and fail and then try again and then try again, that have that sort of, I guess, sense of humor and resilience. Those are the ones, whether you're the happy innkeeper or the entertainer. Like, honestly, I sat next to Andy Peliquin and he outsold me probably by 50% as far as number of copies. I probably outsold him money-wise by a large margin, right? So just because my stuff is very focused on that money generation, right? So I sold fewer copies, but probably made more money. He sold more copies. I mean, that's just a guess. I don't know what he made. So, but my point with all of that is that there are different ways to go about this, and there are different things that you can do to be successful. And as long as you want it, you will find those things. So I don't have 8 categories of different sellers, like, the entertainer and the innkeeper and the whatever. But what I've seen is that was the reason that I logged that one, is because it was different than mine, and I had not yet seen one that was different than mine that did better than I did, right? I'd seen people sell more, but I wasn't right next to them, and like, okay, how did they do it? And so I was able to identify his technique because I was right next to him every time he'd pitch, and do a compare contrast. To to take another example, Matthew Wolf, like I was right next to him the subsequent year at the same con. And there, I know that they did pitches, but I couldn't hear what their pitches were. So I wasn't sure if he was being the entertainer or not. But he had like 4 or 5 people working his booth, and he had a gazillion tchotchkes, right? He had a gazillion different items to sell that were part of the world. He had maps, he had dice, he had cards, he had specialty print books and regular print books and hardbacks and paperbacks and all this different stuff. And so that was a certain kind of selling, right? It's like, oh, you've got an array of treasures here. That is another way of pitching to people without saying anything, right? Now that takes money and it takes time and it takes, honestly, courage to throw down the money to do that and say, oh, is it going to work? Because I don't know how well his cards sell. Maybe he doesn't make any money off of that, or the dice or whatever. Maybe he makes loads of money. I don't know his books, but that was another way of doing it. And I do know that Matthew Wolf is extremely successful doing what he does. So to answer your question, I think the ones that are not successful are the people that sit there and don't say anything, that just kind of, I wrote a fantastic book. People are going to love it. Yes, you probably did write a fantastic book. And yes, people would love it if they knew about it. But there's a whole chasm between your great book and these readers. And if you can't find a way to bridge that chasm by, talking to them or engaging them, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So however you do that, and I've seen people be subtle too, where like they're like, hey, how's it going? But they're not big and bubbly and, effusive like I am. And for some people that really works. They're like, oh, good. This looks cool. It's like, oh, well, this one, is this. Pick it up if you want to. Like that is that sort of like, I'm not desperate to sell you a book, but I'm not disinterested. So it's like they're not being offensive to the person, but at the same time, they're not fawning all over the person. I wouldn't even know how to start to do that. I can't be mysterious and distant. That's not my thing, right? But that's okay, right? I mean, you can play it both ways. So anything could work. But the question is, do you want it bad enough to pay attention? Like I've been talking about, go to a cheap event, buy a cheap booth, and work your, can you do that 2-3 weekends in a row, not in a row, but 2-3 weekends worth of time, and take notes, take it on the chin when you're not doing well, and try and assess what it is that didn't work, try and look for what did work, keep what did work, jettison everything that didn't work, and start that part over again and build your pitch. Well, let me tell you the story about how I first decided that I wanted to do more of this. I was at the end of my rope. I had gone full time. My wife was working, and so I didn't have to worry about money coming in. And I'd saved up enough for a whole year of just writing full time, right? And at the end of the year, I'd spent all my money. I was expecting to make about 50 grand that year, and I made about 1,200 because the book that I thought was going to sell to Tor, they didn't want. And suddenly I had no advance, and I had no money, and I had no way to make money. And I was like, I'm going to have to go back and get a job, right? And my wife tells me, just give it a chance. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? She's like, say yes to everything. I was like, say yes? Nobody's asking me any questions. I can't say yes if there are no questions. And the thing was, there were questions being asked of me. I just wasn't paying attention to them. And when I was reading a newsletter from the Colorado Authors League, I saw this, come work the holiday booth. And I called up the president, and she's like, oh, it's great. You go and you get a piece of a booth, like a third of a table for 2 hours. And then the next day you get 2 hours, and the day after that you get 2 hours, and it costs you $50. Do you want to do it? And I was like, no, I'd rather go to the dentist. Actually, I don't want to do that at all. But I said, yes, right. These are the questions that we don't think are being asked to us. And so I went, worked the whole first day, sold not a single book, watched other authors being like, come on over, get a book. These are Colorado authors, like the whole old time Barker used car salesman. And I'm just like, I can't do that. But I tried the whole day, sold nothing. I went home dejected. Laura's like, how did it go? I'm like, it was worse than I could have imagined. Like I thought it was going to be bad. It was worse than what I imagined it would be. And she's like, are you going to go back? I'm like, well, I said I would go, so I'll go, but I'm not going to do that anymore. So I just went and I sat. And while I was sitting there with my little banner of The Wishing World, which is my middle grade novel, this little girl, maybe 9 years old, is like looking at it from across the way. She's got her mom's hand. The mom's looking at Christmas wreaths or something. And she's looking across the aisle at this booth, and she looks over and sees me watching her, and she's like, and she like turns and looks the other way, right? And so then about a half an hour later, I look up and she's close to the booth and she's still looking at that thing. And I'm like, hey, do you like that kind of story? And she's like, I do like that kind of story. And I was like, well, do you want to hear about that one? She's like, And so I just told her what the story was about. By the end of the day, I had a half dozen kids gathered around for story time. And I was like, you know what? I'm not a salesman, but I can do this. I'm a storyteller. I can tell them about the story. And that's how it started. And then I just started chipping away at it and adding new things to it. And eventually, I mean, like, even the most stony-faced person, I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a try. You know, in the workshop that I do, I talk about the cowboy story. When I was in high school, I was the D&D nerd, and cowboys hated me. They were like these kids that were more like the country types, and they didn't like me at all. So I was afraid of them. I was afraid of cowboys. And years later, when I'm in my 40s, right, and I'm selling books, and this guy comes in, he's like 6'5" and, you know, almost 7 feet tall with his hat. And he's this big guy with a big belt buckle and his jeans and his sour look. And he comes into the thing, and I'm like, well, I'm not pitching to him. No way I'm pitching to that guy. I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to say anything. But then in the back of my mind, it's like, you know what do you got to lose, right? You're never going to see this guy again. Just give it a shot. So he comes walking by, and I sort of say, do you like Lord of the Rings? And he kind of like looks at me and he's like, yep. I was like, oh, well, that's kind of what I do. Do you want to hear about these books? He's like, yep. And so I pitched him on the books. He bought a trilogy and left. And I was like, okay, this goes to show you that even if it looks intimidating to try and pitch your stories to somebody, what have you got to lose? A. B, you might secretly find a huge fan, right? This might be exactly what he loves. And you don't know. Don't judge that book by its cover, so to speak. So that's how it starts. And that's how it started for me, I should say. And that's how it could start for anybody who's interested in doing this. Just try, like, get out there, find out what works, find out what doesn't work, find out when you're talking to somebody, when their eyes just go to half mast and they're asleep and they're not listening to you anymore, or conversely, when they start to really, you know, engage and connect with you. Once they do, you write that down, you keep that, right? And the truth of the matter is, sometimes that thing that worked really well for that person is not going to work for somebody else. And you'll get good at that too, like shifting gears, being like, okay, the really entertainer pitch is not working for this person. I'm going to back off a little bit, just give them some space, let them read the cover of the book. So yeah, lots of different ways to do it.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've noticed a similar thing whenever we've been to conventions as well, is that usually I have a pitch that I have kind of 5 different points in mind, that maybe on points 1 or 2, people are a little glazed over. They're like, not that big of a deal to me. I've used Scrivener before. I don't care. But I'll get to point 3 or 4, and all of a sudden I'll see them light up and go, oh man, that's really cool. So I can imagine you'd have to kind of do the same thing with your pitch. Is there maybe elements that maybe that person is a very plot-driven reader, so maybe hearing all about the character's backstory isn't a big deal, but the second you get to the big epic, you know, all the stuff they're doing in the plot, they go, oh, okay, this sounds really neat. Along these lines, I am picking up on a few elements that you've kind of mentioned throughout that I think, you know, are interesting things for us to kind of draw out a little bit more. You mentioned comp titles with, you know, basically that being kind of used as a comparative. Is that like a good shorthand in some cases to have up your sleeve?
So I have a whole school of thought on this at this point, because like I said, I do long pitches, or typically I do long pitches. And sitting next to Andy Peliquin 2.5 years ago, watching him do micro short comparable pitches really got me to thinking, okay, clearly my stuff does work, but sometimes I get slammed. I get so many people there that I can't do a 60-second pitch for every single person. I've had lines that went, you know, for 20 feet away from my booth. And when that's happening, you can't do that. Usually if that's happening, you don't have to say anything. You're just like, here's a book, pay your money. Here's a book, pay your money, right? Sign it. But at this last Fan Expo Denver, which was just back in June, me and my booth helper at the time came up with these pitches. Well, I should say, Ori came up with like 3 out of 4 of these pitches. I was thinking about some short pitches. They went home that night. They came back and like, here's some things. What do you think? And I would say 80% of what they came up with, I ended up using, and I made these micro pitches. Like, we're talking 5-second pitches where it's like, so this is all the fantasy, all of the found family of Vox Machina, but it moves at the pace of F1 the movie. Yes, the race car movie. That's it. Out, right? So that it gives them a couple of things. If you're moving really fast, it can be really good. And I started using those throughout the day, just in cases where it seemed like people were really in a hurry. And it was great. I mean, I wouldn't say that they're better than the long pitches, because when I see somebody getting into the long pitches, it is an emotional thing. With the short pitches, it's an intellectual thing. They're like connecting something that you say to something they already have an emotion about. And it's not about you. It's about this intellectual, ooh, I might like that, right? But the long pitches can create this connection with what you have. And that's what I love about them, is that it's not about F1 the movie, and it's not about Vox Machina. It is about Threadweavers, right? Or Eldros Legacy, or the Whisper Prince. It's about these IPs that I've created. And that's what I ultimately want. So sometimes it's a risk to go on that long pitch, but I have seen people who, when I said, do you want to hear about a book? And they're like, yeah, sure, I'll hear about a book. And I start into the pitch, and I can see them start to be like, oh, this is going to take a while. But then I will like weave in more of the hand motions, or something that I think will get them. I'll jolt them. I'll pause for a second, right? Or put in some theatrical pause, or theatrical raising of my voice, or something to catch their attention again. And then I'll just be meticulous about making sure that what I'm telling them is the coolest, most amazing way that it can be told. And I've watched, it doesn't happen often, but sometimes, even when somebody's about to check out, they'll re-engage, and then they start to sink into it because of that length of the pitch, the amount of time that it gives them to understand what you're talking about in an emotional way.
Right. I think there's a couple of offshoots that I want to follow here. First and foremost, it sounds like having different lengths is a good idea. So you've got like the micro pitch, that it sounds like the easiest way to start with that one is some format of a comp title, because we're talking, you may have 5 seconds for that. And then if we're talking about maybe like more of a medium length pitch, let's say 15 to 20 seconds, maybe it's more what we would consider the classic elevator pitch. And then finally getting out more into the longer pitch length, in which
emotional, mood-based pitch. Yep.
Exactly.
It can't hurt. I mean, I don't have the medium pitch myself. I've just got the short ones and the long ones, but I would think work any number of different length pitches and find out what works best.
Right. And I guess I'm curious, whenever we get into what I assume the medium and the long pitches, we've talked to Kevin Eikenberry and we've talked to Michael Morton about various character goals and how those get woven into your story structure, all of that. In these pitches, what is that actual goal that you're looking to pitch to kind of catch the reader's interest? Is it more of that, emotional goal? Is it the big, fireworks and basically lasers professional goal that's over the whole story? Where is the one that you find tends to resonate the most?
Well, I mean, mine kind of came together organically, but if I were to give advice to somebody else on this, it would be to lean into your strengths, right? Whatever is strongest about your writing, that's something that you want to highlight in your pitch. Now, for me, I am a character-driven author. So my pitches going to start with the characters. It's going to start there. But I also pride myself on, though I write in epic fantasy and everything under the sun has been done in epic fantasy, I have an original take on a lot of things when I'm building a story. I want it to be new. I don't want to do the same old that you've seen before. So I try and put something about the originality of the setting or the originality of the plot into the pitch that I'm doing.
Okay, so it sounds like when building these pitches, kind of think about, what you think are the strong points of your writing, the strong points of your books, and kind of use that as places as kind of, hooks to hang your hat on, essentially.
Yeah, it's just like doing back cover copy, right? I mean, if you write a back cover copy that really leans into the tropes of hard science fiction, and you are a, space opera science fiction or an epic fantasy writer, like your reader's going to be pissed when they get in there and they're like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, right? Your pitch should be the same way. It should reflect you as a writer, because if it reflects something else, when they get in and find out, oh, this guy's really lyrical and I don't like lyrical writers, and his pitch was really short and crisp and fast paced, and I don't know why I got this in the first place. It's going to be a disappointment to them. So you lean into your strengths. Whatever your strengths are as a writer, make your pitch reflect that. And the people that love that kind of thing, they're going to stick around for a more lyrical pitch if they're looking for lyrical writing. You know what I mean?
Right. So kind of in a way almost having your pitch reflect the voice that you would be using in these books. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So I think, folks, one of the things that I would probably recommend if I was starting off trying to pitch some of my work, going through and really getting a feel for what you would describe your voice as, and it's just dependent on where you're at. I would describe some of the stuff that I do as a little bit irreverent in some places and things like that. So that's probably would be what I would lean into if I was trying to pitch those works. Another point that I did want to kind of loop back around to, you mentioned whenever you see kind of people kind of starting to shut down during these pitches, what do you do to kind of re-engage them? I know we mentioned, there's certain things that we can do physically as far as hand motions, pauses, things like that. Are you switching up the pitch at all during the flow if you see that they're kind of, starting to glaze over?
Absolutely. I mean, and most of the time, if they start to glaze over, you're probably not going to get them back. I mean, that's the truth of it, right? And it's just a matter of doing your best. But I've also been surprised where I thought that they were disengaging, and I continued like a professional to continue the pitch. And at the end, you're like, there's no way they're buying this. And they're like, I'll take all of them. I mean, like sometimes you just can't tell people from their face. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty good reader of people's body language and their facial expressions, but I get it wrong. I wouldn't say more often than not, but I get it wrong a good chunk of the time, probably 20 to 30% of the time. I got no clue what's going on behind the eyes, which is why it's important to not get emotional about the rejection when it's happening, in the middle of when it's happening. Don't get mad or don't get, timid or whatever. Just keep doing what you're doing. Cool, calm, professional. Don't mess up something that you're not sure about at this point, right? So I would say in order to re-engage them, like I said before, sometimes it's, realizing that I'm mailing it in. Sometimes that happens, right? I mean, I love my books and I love going to cons, but man, if you've been doing this for a day and a half and you've done hundreds of pitches and the same pitch over and over and over again, it's easy to be like, yes, this is the Eldros Legacy and it's about these 5 main characters who have to stop the end of the world. I mean, like, you could realize all of a sudden, oh my gosh, my inflection is for crap, right? I mean, like, I am not doing this like it's the first time I've ever done it. And so I got to reset and try and bring that emotion in the middle of the pitch. That could do it. Like I said before, sometimes you might be moving too fast. Maybe you're thinking about lunch and you've done the pitch a million times and you're on autopilot, and maybe you are inflecting like you always inflect, but you're moving a little fast and they're like kind of sensing that you're trying to rush to get through this. That's when I'll do that pause. Like I'll come up to a point in the story and be like, and then the giants return and we weren't expecting it. You know what I mean? Like something that breaks up the monotony that you've kind of maybe gotten into a rhythm of. So that can work too. Hand gestures or picking up something off the table. Like I've got these bookmarks of Kaiven, or I've got art everywhere, and I might, point to a piece of the art or even pick it up and say, and that's when these guys come in. You do something that breaks up whatever it is that you were doing before. That might shock them and re-engage them, or at least, reset what's going on. Those are some of the ways that I will sometimes re-engage them.
Okay. And another point that I have some curiosity on is if you have multiple series, how do you kind of direct the readers to the right book? Because I'm thinking about one of the conferences that I went to. I was, at an author table, and I'm usually almost strictly a fantasy reader. And this author writes both sci-fi and fantasy, and they had sold out of their fantasy copies. And I said, okay, I want to make sure I get something from you. Basically, if I'm not going to read this series that you recommended to me on the fantasy side, then what other book should I get in this case? And they said, okay, are you into mysteries? And I go, don't usually read a whole bunch of them, but I love English cozy mysteries like Midsummer Murders, all of that. Big fan. She goes, well, do you watch any of the old 1940s mysteries? And because have you seen Thin Man? And I immediately lit up because that's one of my favorite movies. Oh my God, yes, that's one of my favorite. William Powell, Myrna Loy, all of this. And she just goes, this is the one you need to read then, because it is Thin Man, but in space. And I just instantly went, okay, sold, done.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you just described the best way to do that. Yeah. I mean, like if they are like, well, I usually read science fiction. Are you all epic fantasy? I'm like, yeah. Then something like that, saying, well, this one over here, have you ever watched blah, 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 whatever it is, whatever movie that comes to my mind for this one. Or, what kind of stuff do you read? Like, just ask them straight out. What kind of, give me a specific example. And they'll be like, oh, well, I read this particular mystery. Like, oh, well, that main character, actually, the way that he's really sort of, laissez-faire and everything always goes his way. And he's just really relaxed and just seems to get lucky all the time. Just like this character over here. So if you're thinking of dipping your toe in fantasy, you're going to love the character in this one, because so that's what you do. You connect them in some way. I think what I keep in the back of my mind with something like that, when somebody tells me I don't usually read fantasy, my thought is, I bet I could get them if they just crack the cover. If they say, I hate fantasy, I will never read any fantasy book, I might say something like, well, what if there's a twist on the normal trope where the main character dies in the first 5 pages or whatever? And they're like, really? Like, you can see if they're interested, right? You can catch them on just sort of a Hail Mary pass. Doesn't happen very often, but you might get them. But generally speaking, if they're even a little bit interested, I just come up with a legit, genuine connection from something that they've said, and let fate take the rest. I believe that if they start reading what I'm writing, they're going to enjoy it, right? Unless they're just absolutely against fantasy in general, I think that I'll be able to win them over. And you just got to trust in that. Find that connection, tell them this is like what you said you liked over here. If you want to give it a shot, I think that you'd really like Kaivan the Unkillable, or whatever it is that comes to my mind.
Okay, great. So I think before we get into some examples, because I do want to talk about that, what are your tips for the mortals among us, aka the introverts, that this stuff does not in any way come naturally? And how do you recommend kind of getting over the nerves and basically how you can get started with this stuff? Because I do think, the huge thing that I'm hearing out of this is it comes down to practice, 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 ultimately. But
for sure,
I'm sure there's tips and tricks that you can use to make yourself a little less nervous when it comes to approaching this stuff.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that, though I do have an extroverted side, I'm like right in the middle. I am not an extreme introvert, but I'm neither an extreme extrovert either. So for me, like I said, that first day that I went to the very first holiday show I ever did, I was miserable because I was trying to be this extroverted salesperson, right? And it was not genuine, and it was painful, and I was nervous and all of that stuff, right? But what happened was I connected into something that I loved, which is to tell stories. And so that's what I would recommend to anybody who is timid about selling to other people. You do not have to be as bombastic and energetic as I am. Like I said, there are those that I have seen that are more, I wouldn't say standoffish, but they're like mysterious. They're like, yeah, no, I think that you would probably like that. And then they sort of, they withdraw, not as in you're not welcome here, but as in I'm going to give you your space, because I think there have probably been some very extreme introverts that have come up to my booth. I was too bombastic for them and they left, right? I think there probably that has happened in the past. It's like, this is too much energy here. I'm a reader and I don't really want to be pitched to, right? And there are some people that I say, hey, do you want to hear about a book? And they have picked up the book and I'm like, oh, do you want to hear about that book? And they're like, I just want to read it. I leave them alone, right? I go to the other side of the booth. I make sure that I keep an eye on them just in case they want something from me, but right. I leave them alone. So finding your style, I guess what I would say to the people that are introverts is you do have something that connects with other people. And it's okay to allow yourself to do that in the way that is comfortable to you. Now, that said, this is also probably breaking some boundaries for you or breaking some reluctances for you. And that's why I go back to the people that succeed at this are the people who want it. You don't have to be an extrovert to sell your books to people, but you do have to want it. You do have to be assessing what you could do better, shoring up your weaknesses when you can, playing to your strengths every time. And that's the best advice that I can give in that respect. You don't have to be nervous. And if you get nervous, fall into the thing that you love. Like, why are you even here? Why did you even want to come and sell your books? Why do you even want people to read your stuff? Fall into that because you know you're doing something fantastic. And if the people would just read it, they would know. Fall into that. That's where you live. And you come out to try and tell people about this cool thing that you've created, right? And then just make it up as you go. And like I said before, start keeping a list of the failures, stick them up on your wall like rejection slips. One of the guys that is kind of a business mentor for me, his name is Terry Huddleston, and he's next to me at San Diego. I'll be seeing him shortly. This guy is fantastic business person. Like, I just love his setup. It's simple. It's clean. It has like 3 thresholds of things that people can buy. And anyways, he sells a ton. And I asked him once, how do you know when something's working? He's like, I love failure. Failure's great. Failure tells me what I need to work on next. Like, I'm always looking for things to work on. And when I fail horribly at something, I'm like, okay, I need to do that better. This part worked, but these 5 things did not work. So I'm going to it's just, he looks at that as, this is what helps me when I'm bored. Like, I've done this thing and now it's really working. How do I make it work better? Well, I'm going to try this. Well, that didn't work. I'm going to try this and this and this to make it work. Like, it's like a project for him. And I think if people could look at failure in that respect, that it's like, it's not a commentary on you as a person and your self-worth. It is the next step. It's going to show you the tunnel that you need to go down next. And if you look at it like that, more as a signpost than a damning accusation, I think that you can only get better. The person who is immune to suffering from failure, how can they lose? That you can't lose, right? Because it's all just additive. It's all going to be building on the base of what you already have.
And folks, one of the things I would tack onto this too is that this stuff sounds really, really scary at first, especially if you've never done it before. But you will start falling into figuring it out very, very quickly. Because I know the first con that we went to for EmberWrite, I knew that I was going to have the pitch ready. I kind of had my walkthrough ready, and I knew where that was going to go. But it has ended up being a series of points of data gathering for me. And that's the way that you need to kind of think about it. Is it's not necessarily that this is some statement on you. You have not found enough data in the beginning to figure out what is going to work and what's not. You may get lucky and you may hit on it right off the bat. The likelihood of that happening is very, very minimal, but you are going to have things that work in that first pitch that you go, okay, people resonated with this part, but they didn't resonate with this part. And sometimes that's a sample size. If you pitched to a grand total of 10 people at your first event on your first day, that may indicate that it's the pitch. That may indicate that those 10 people just were too small of a sample size. You may try it the next day and do it to 40 and 50 people and have a great success rate. So I think that's the thing, folks, is treat this as every time you pitch, it's a data point. And you have to look at this and say, okay, is this a large enough sample size for me to indicate, okay, this is not working? Or is this basically a chance that this could just be normal variance to it too? So I think that kind of takes the pressure off, at least took the pressure off me, because that helped me when we got to our second con. Then I said, okay, I kind of know where people tend to lean on the features they're most interested in. I'll start with those. I may ask them a couple of questions here to clarify so I know exactly where to dive into. But again, that helped me improve. And, when we go to our third conference and our fourth conference and our fifth conference, I'll still be refining that.
So if I can comment on that, because I love every single thing that you just said there. Data is so important. I wouldn't have expected that. I mean, being from the creative side of things, it's like, okay, data, that's for other people, right? But when I was doing these cons early on, there would be long stretches of downtime where there's nobody coming. And during that time, I would start to play with things and be like, okay, well, let's see if we can answer a question here or there or whatever, and start compiling, like, how many books did I sell today? How many books did I sell in the last hour? So I got to the point where I was keeping track of every single book that I sold in an hour, right? And then once you've gone to this con 3 years in a row, you start looking back and going, oh my gosh, last year by noon I had sold 30 books, and right now I'm only at 15. I got to step up my game or whatever. One of the things that I did when I was collecting data was people come up and they say, oh, I love this. I'll be back. Let me go get my wife and we'll come back, right? And I was like, yeah, they don't come back. This maybe 1 in 15 people come back, right? If you lose them at that point, you lose them. But I started keeping track of the data on it when somebody would say that. And I don't mean people that are clearly trying to get away from you. I mean people that genuinely say, oh, I love this. I'll be back. I would write them down. I would just put a little hash mark, say, okay, there's a be back, to see if I was right. See if it was 1 in 15 people. You know what it actually was once I collected the data? 1 in 5. It was so much better than what I thought, right? That just goes to show when you get rejected, there's this huge emotional turmoil. And you're like, oh, they're never coming back. But when I started to actually keeping track of the data on that, I realized it's way better than you think. Like, it's 1 in 5 people actually come back. Yes, they do. But you don't know that because it's usually a different context. They come in, you're like, oh, I recognize this person. But when you write it down and think about them and try and burn their face into your mind when they come back, and then you jot down that they came back, it's a whole different ballgame. So cannot stress enough. Keeping the data will keep you sane. It will make you believe things that you would have believed otherwise because of emotions and rejection and that sort of thing that you wouldn't know without the numbers. Love it.
And I think keeping track of those moments too, even if it's just the kind of qualitative keeping track, because I think of a couple of cons that I've had a couple of folks that I'm like, there's no way they're going to buy. They're not even going to go check the trial out for EmberWrite. I don't think they're going to come back. And then about 2 to 3 weeks later, I'll see so-and-so made a purchase. I go, I remember them. They were one of the people that I didn't think were actually going to buy. So
yes.
Keep track of that kind of thing because it may surprise you in the end. Because I think we all have our biases and we all have things that we think we know. And it doesn't always end up being the case. So there may be things that end up surprising you with this stuff. So try to have fun with it and be a nerd about it from a fun perspective, not a, hey, I'm tracking everything, just because I feel like I have to, but track those kinds of things because that's going to help you overall and help increase your confidence in the pitch, I feel like, immensely. Okay, with all of that being said, let's talk about an actual example of a pitch. So, obviously, good examples of pitches in the wild. Are there certain cons that you've been to that you feel like have a lot of people that have done great pitches that basically if somebody is, trying to dip their toe in for the first time, but let's say they're super anxious about doing that first event and they kind of want to see, okay, well, what kind of environment am I going to be pitching in, that kind of thing. Are there any events that you recommend that people go to just to get a taste of what they might be looking at?
Like I said, if you're trying to hone your pitches, I highly recommend doing small events locally. You can find them. They're everywhere. Places that have booths for arts and crafts and things like that. And maybe they don't have any sort of angle on authors. And you think, oh, well, nobody's going to buy a book at a, yarn arts and crafts fair. Wrong. Like you've cornered the market there. There's no other authors there. That's great. You go to freaking Fan X or Denver Fan Expo or something. There's a million other authors there at this point. You have huge competition. Yeah, you've got a lot of people, a lot more people than this arts and crafts fair, but you also have a lot more competition. So do those smaller fairs first. As far as audience, like reader receptive audiences, or book receptive audiences, I've heard great things. I've not yet been to Lit RPG Con, but I've heard great things about it. I feel like I keep my friend Mark Stallings keeps texting me and saying, oh my gosh, they're just throwing money at authors here. Like they don't even care what you write. They're just like, so that's apparently a good one. But I've not been there. I really like Planet Comic-Con in Kansas City. Seems like there's a really strong reader base in Kansas City. And that one's always good. I feel like they're really polite to authors. So that's a good one. But it's starting to get filled up. Like there's a lot of authors that have caught on that this is a good way to sell books. So there's also high competition there. I mean, any brand name con that you go to, I would say harder ones to sell at San Diego Comic-Con. I mean, San Diego Comic-Con is off the hook. And so there's enough people there that you can sell books, but man, I don't work harder anywhere else than I do at San Diego Comic-Con. And there are other good reasons to be at San Diego Comic-Con. But that's a tough sell. And it's tough to get into that con, and it's expensive to get into that con as well. I'm trying to think of the ones that I think are the best for readers. I hear good things about Dragon Con. I've been to Dragon Con as an attendee, or rather an attending professional, but not as a seller. I didn't have a booth, but I've heard it's just crazy off the chain. Like people are just buying, and like they sell the most of any other con. So that's a good one, but also expensive and difficult to get into. So yeah, is that kind of your question?
Because I think, folks, the thing is that if you are looking to get into this seriously and you just want to understand what this environment is going to look like before you decide whether to go into it, fully, those are good places to go look. Go walk down the parts of the vendor alley that maybe you wouldn't have walked down, because then you'll get a feel for if somebody basically pulls you over to their booth. You're going to sit there and go, okay, well, let me see what they did that worked. And I think that's a good way to get these data points because, yes, I agree completely. I think the small events are the absolute best thing you can do. But if you're somebody that's going to these events anyway, I think it's just a new angle of looking at it to say, okay, well, is this something that I could get into? Is this something that I could see myself doing? What do I feel is working from other people that I could kind of steal from my pitch to?
Absolutely. I mean, like the things that I have learned from other people, I was talking about Andy Peliquin and Matthew Wolf. I mean, like watching them work, and I'm pretty good at what I do, but there's always more to learn. There's always more to learn. So, and you can learn it from people that maybe aren't even at the same selling level that you are, but they're doing something different and weird. And you're like, I like that. That's really cool. Glom onto all of that. And I think that walking down the aisle, like of some of these cons have author alleys where like all the authors are in the same place. I'm not a big fan of being in the author alley, but there are advantages to it. There's pros and cons to being there versus being somewhere else where the authors are not. But going down that aisle, seeing who engages you and who engages you successfully. And I can tell you, you walk up to any author anywhere and say, hey, I'd love to hear your pitch. Pitch me your book. I mean, if they don't jump out of their chair to pitch you their book, they're not worth buying something from. I mean, like if somebody said, please pitch me your book, and they don't, they're not trying hard at all.
Absolutely. So I think one more quick question, and then I want to get into an actual pitch and then a little bit more about your books. If you could go back in time and talk to Todd that was just getting started pitching, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice?
That's funny. I think I would say to him, this isn't a waste of time. And you actually can make money at it. I know it seems like you can't right now, but you can. Because I mean, it took me, I was doing this for 2 years just as a way to get my books out into the world. I was like, I was at home. Like I said, my wife was taking care of the money at that particular point, and I was just trying to see what I could do to build the business out, right? Or to just get my books, to not be sitting at home doing nothing, right? I mean, that's pretty much what it was. Like, I'm going to push some books out into the world. And as long as I can break even, I'll feel good about myself. And even if it costs me a few $100s to go out and do this, that's worth it, right? I mean, it's marketing. My books are getting out there. People are seeing my name, that sort of thing. And it took 2 years before all of a sudden this light bulb went off over my head. And I was like, holy crap, wait a minute. So if I can make $2,000 at a con, I can make $3,000. And if I can make $3,000, surely I can make $5,000. And if I can make $5,000 at a con and I do 20 cons in a year, that's $100,000, right? This can make money. Boom. That was a revelation for me. And as soon as I did that, I was chasing the $5,000 con. And as soon as I hit the $5,000 con, I was chasing the $10,000 con. Because I'm like, well, it'd be better if I could do 10 cons and $10,000 a con. That'd be great, right? So that's when it started. So I would tell myself, you don't have to stress out so much. Just look, learn, listen, and believe that you can do it, that this can be something. You can actually make money doing this.
Awesome. So, saving the best for last here. Go ahead. Let's walk through one of the pitches for one of your books.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, since you've got Khyven the Unkillable up there, right behind you on what to me is the left-hand side, but behind you on your right. So that's the Khyven the Unkillable book, which is the first in the Eldros Legacy book. So what I would do is if somebody's walking by my booth, I'd be like, hey, Micah, you want to hear about a book? Of course, if I knew your name, probably I wouldn't have to, So you say...
Absolutely. Why not?
Outstanding. Well, let me tell you about this one. And at my booth, I will have a poster in front of it that has all 5 of the main characters on the front of it. And I also have a huge 8x8 banner behind me that has all 5 main characters on it. And I'll say, okay, so this is the Eldros Legacy, and it centers around these 5 main characters who have all come together to stop the end of the world because the giants are coming back. Now, 2,000 years ago in the world of Eldros, everything was ruled by these 15-foot tall, highly intelligent, highly magical giants. None of your tall as a mountain, dumb as a rock kind of giants, okay? So all of the mortal races, that's us, humans, luminants, Shadowvar, Brightlings, all of them back in the day were servants to this powerful race of giants. Then there was a revolution. The war was long, it was bloody, and the mortal races almost died out, but in the end, they prevailed. Half the giants were killed during the war, the other half fled and magically vanished. We don't know what happened to them. So the story begins 2,000 years after this historic war. At this point, we rule the continent. Humans, luminants, Shadowvar, Brightlings, we got kingdoms everywhere. And we have all completely forgotten about the giants. But the giants are immortal, and they have forgotten nothing. And in the shadows, they have pulled an army straight from nightmare, and they're about to unleash it upon us. When they do, the only thing standing between them and absolute victory is this group of 5, led by a man who just might be unkillable. That's the Eldros Legacy.
Okay.
So that is the long pitch that I would do. The short pitch is what I told you before. All of the found family, all of the fantasy of Vox Machina, but it moves at the pace of F1, the movie.
Right. And I think especially for Kaivan the Unkillable, I can imagine my first question would be, okay, found family, you've got me there. Explain a little bit more. And I think from there, that's where you go into, this is more of the creativity side of things and basically working off of your room and working off the energy you've got and things like that.
And of course, the moment they ask a question, that's just the cherry on top of the sundae. I mean, it's like, so wait a minute, what do you mean found family? It's like, oh, well, this guy right here, I mean, I could go on and on and on.
So, because I know on your main pitch for Eldros, I'd be like, okay, how is he unkillable? My fiance has already read the book. He read it in a grand total of 3 days.
So he knows.
Strongly recommended I read it next, but he's been telling me like little bits and pieces about it, and I'm like, okay, my interest is piqued. I'm going to have to read it. So, alrighty. So I think last thing is with that pitch, where can our listeners and audience find out more about your books?
Yeah, best place is toddfahnestock.com. I've got all my books there. You can get them, and you can get them signed. If you get them from me off my website, I will sign them. If you want me to personally inscribe it, I can do that too. All of that is worked from my office space, and I'll mail it right out to you. So that's the best place to find all this stuff. You can also get them on Amazon if you're an Amazon person, and you can get either the ebooks or the audiobooks or the hard copies, both paperback and hardback, on my website, on Amazon, and probably at any bookstore as well. You can get that.
And I know, having seen your booth set up at Superstars, as far as like art, swag, things like that readers can pick up, do you have that available on your site as well?
I do. I don't have my posters up yet, but you can buy them if you email me. Just like do a contact at the website, or you can go to todd.fahnestock@gmail.com. You can just email me straight to that. I'm happy to mail out the posters. A lot of people ask that at the booth because I've got these fantastic, expensive hollow foil raised print posters. And now, new as of San Diego Comic-Con coming up, I will have smaller, less expensive posters, because the big ones, the cool ones, are like $200 a piece. But the smaller ones I now have for $35, and I have little postcards. In fact, I wonder if I have one. Hang on a second. I'll grab one and show you. So I've got these little ones too, for people that want to just get like a taste of it. These are going to be like $7 or whatever at the con. So yeah, so all kinds of cool stuff that you can get, and you can get them all off my website, but you'll probably have to reach out to me until I get it updated with all of the new stuff.
Gotcha. And folks, having seen this in person, it's really, really fantastic art. Very, very eye-catching. Highly recommend looking at it. All right, Todd, so we'll go ahead and call that a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us. I am sure that this is a wealth of information for folks about how to start refining their pitches, and I hope it encourages more people to start getting out there at live events.
Me too.
All righty, all. Well, we will see you at the next craft chat. Thank you all for your time.